תשמרו בני ישראל אמס השבוס ועשויס es השבוס.
Good morning. We're starting chapter 23 in Mesil Shasharm, and today we're going to be talking about how to change one's character traits. You know, people say it's impossible to change. I was born this way. I can't improve. But the whole essence of Judaism is not like that. A very important part of Judaism is that we can change. We can become better people. So today we're going to learn specific strategies how to change our character traits, how to improve our character traits and become better people. Specifically, we're going to discuss it regarding a very important character trait, which is humility. How do we become more humble people? And really what we're going to learn in regards to humility, we can really apply to other character traits. But humility is at the center. It's a very important, very, very important character traits, because when we're humble, a lot of other things will follow from that. If we're humble, we don't think we're the most important person in the world, then we won't get angry so fast. We'll do our obligations, things that we have to do, and we will generally become better people. So humility is a very, very important character trait, especially during Elul as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah, the idea that is the essence of the day is we make Hashem king over us, that we realize that what we want is not the most important thing in the world, but rather we are supposed to subjugate our desires to that of Hashem, which is a very hard thing to do overnight, because naturally human beings, we all have an ego, we all want to do what we want to do, but little by little in Elul we train ourselves to forego our own desires in order to serve Hashem and to make Hashem king over us. So let's start learning, how does a person become more humble? And again, many of these concepts we can apply to any character trait that a person is trying to improve on. So, Shnayim heim hamargilim es ha'adam el hanaver. There are two things that bring a person to humility. Haragilus v'hizbonin. One is training himself, and contemplation. So let's see what this means. Haragilus hu shia ha'adam margil atzmo ma'at ma'at behisnayig b'shiflos al derech shezacharnu. By training himself, or herself, we mean that a person should act in a humble way, in the ways that we mentioned before. So, training oneself means to do things that are humble actions. For example, if you have the option to sit in the front, where the important people sit, or to sit somewhere less dignified, sit in the back, you should sit in the back. And also, when you sit at the end of a group. You walk in the rear of a group. Lilbosh beged snuim, wear modest garments. People think that modesty only applies to women. That's not true. Modesty applies to men also. You see that right here. One should wear modest garments. And modesty means in this sense that they should be dignified garments, but they shouldn't be very impressive garments that draw attention to oneself. You don't have to wear the most expensive items. Because when a person acts in this way, humility will enter his heart little by little until it becomes implanted there to the best level. So it's interesting here that we see that by acting in a humble way, with the goal of becoming humble, that will actually impact a person's character traits. That the external actions that a person does will eventually impact the internal person, because humility, we mentioned before, the Ramchal talked about how if a person just pretends to be humble by doing these humble actions, sitting in the back and acting like he's the most humble guy, when it comes to humility he's the greatest, but in his heart he's really an arrogant person, then that's not good. But here the Ramchal is saying that if your goal is to become more humble, by acting in that way, in a physical way, acting that way, it eventually will affect your heart, will eventually change your character traits. And this applies by any character trait. If we start acting externally with those character traits, with the goal of changing ourselves, it eventually will impact our heart, because our heart follows after the way we act. Since a person's heart, by nature, wants to rule over others. People have an ego. This is a totally human, natural desire, tendency that people want to rule over others. Kasha alav la'akar meikar hanatiyat tivus hazos. It's very difficult to uproot this. Elim kain ba'pa'ulas achitzonas hamasuras biyado yamshich ma'at ma'at hadavar b'pnimiuso habilti masalo kol kach. The only way to change it is, not the only way, the way to change it is through external actions that little by little it will impact a person's insides, his inner being. Okay, like we mentioned by Zrizus, what we said by Zrizus. Zrizus means alacrity, zealousness when performing mitzvahs, that a person runs to perform the commandments. And we said the way to acquire this character trait is by physically acting out Zrizus, even if you don't feel it in the inside. You get up for davening in the morning and you run to go daven, even if you don't feel it, but the external action of running to davening will change your internal being. All of this concept is included in the statement of the sages. A person always should be clever when it comes to fearing Hashem. That when it comes to improving our character and growing spiritually, we have to be clever. We have to come up with ideas, clever ideas, to uproot our natural selfish desires. Because a human being is born naturally with an ego and being selfish, and to change that character trait, one has to be very clever. So the Ramchal is saying here, a very important concept, that when it comes to changing character traits, one should physically change, and he should change his external character, and eventually that will impact his internal character. So specifically here, he's talking about when it comes to humility. So that's the first thing, is practice, regilus, is training oneself to act in a humble way to change the insides. Now what's the second way to become humble? The other way is to contemplate different aspects of humility. If one wants to change his character, we have to think about and contemplate what we're trying to do and the truth of these character traits. How so? The first thing is what's mentioned in Pirkei Avos. Damein ba'asa. Know from where you came. Metipas rucha, from a putrid drop. La'anata holich, and where you're going. L'makam afer rima v'taleya, that eventually you're going to be going to a place of dirt and worms, right? Everyone's going to die. And who you are going to give an accounting. In front of the King of Kings. So if a person wants to be humble, the second thing he has to do is contemplate these ideas, meaning sit and think, where did I come from? I think I'm so important, I'm the leader of this, the head of this. Well, where did I come from? I came from a putrid drop. I came from, nothing. Where am I going? Everyone dies. Everyone's going to end up in the ground. And who am I going to have to give a din v'cheshbon? Meaning, who am I going to have to give an accounting of my life? To God. So all of those ideas, it's easy to say the ideas, but making those ideas part of ourselves, that comes with great contemplation and thinking about these ideas. Ki be'emes kol elahim negdim l'gai v'ozrim elanava. All of these ideas, they are the opposite of haughtiness, and they help to bring humility. Ki biyosa ad mistakel bepchisus chamro ugrius haschalasa. When a person realizes the lowliness of his physical being and the low level that he began, a person should just be embarrassed, right? I'm going to be haughty. I'm going to rule over others for what? I'm a human being. I'm a physical nature. I'm not going to be here forever. It's when we really put everything in perspective. Most of those things that we get upset about, that we get angry that someone insulted us or said something degrading about us. In the end, does it matter, right? If we're really humble, those things wouldn't bother us, and if in truth they shouldn't, because we're all not going to be here one day, and it's all not going to matter. But the trick is making those ideas part of ourselves. And how do we do that? So the first thing we learned is that by acting in a humble way, even if we don't feel it right away. And the second is by contemplating these statements of the sages and putting into perspective the truth of humility and what it means. And again, by thinking about these things, we know these ideas intellectually, but the trick is changing ourselves. And a person doesn't change overnight. It takes a long time. but with consistent work, it'll happen. Halamazadami. What is this similar to? Lo'er chazirim she'agia limloch. Imagine a pig farmer who becomes king. Whenever he remembers his previous profession, what he used to do, it's impossible that he become haughty. I'm going to be haughty that I'm the king. I used to be a pig farmer. And when he realizes that at the end of his reign, he's going to die and he's going to become food for worms, he'll forget his haughtiness. What is the point of his greatness? And eventually he's just going to be it's going to be humiliation and shame. He cancelled and eventually he's going to go in front of the heavenly tribunal. He's going to be in front of God, the most pure and holy being. With the angels that have nothing, no imperfections, and he's going to stand there as a human being with all of his sins and whatnot. Impure from his deeds. Is that something to be haughty about? Is there anything he could say? They'll say to him, where is your mouth? What are you going to say? You're so... Where is your haughtiness and your honor that you ruled in your world? What is he going to answer? And what will he respond to this rebuke? If a person would implant this feeling in his mind, then all of the feelings of haughtiness would go away from him. So very, very intense stuff here. To think about that a human being, in the end, if we think about just simply that we're all not going to be here, and all of the things that we thought were important, feeling important, having the important position, people praising us and having honor, and we realize that eventually we're not going to be here. We're all going to wind up in the ground, as depressing as it may seem, but it's the truth. And we realize that there's no reason to be haughty. It's a reason, in fact, to be humble and to focus on life. What's important. The only thing that's going to... Really, I said it's depressing, but it's not depressing. If a person spends his life in spiritual pursuits, that's the only thing that will stay with him after he dies, is what he accomplished spiritually in this world. The mitzvahs that he did, the way that he or she improved their character, and what he did for other people. That's going to stay with the person. All the other things, the money, the prestige, that is all going to end. So just to summarize, the two ways that we learn to change our character traits, specifically here we're talking about humility, is one is to act in a different way, act in a humble way. Don't be in the front, don't be center of attention. Dress in a dignified yet humble manner. And when we act in a humble way, that will impact how we feel on the inside. And number two is to contemplate what humility is and why we should be humble. These statements of the sages, where we came from, where we're going. And through these two ways of humility, of achieving humility, and again, this can apply to any character trait. One is, again, acting in that way, the trait we're trying to achieve. And two is to contemplate the truth of the midah, of the character trait which we are trying to achieve. And wishing everyone a dry, happy day.